Welcome to Snapshot, an audio moment in time with people who are not famous. I'm your host, Jerry McDonald. In astronomy, there is occasionally something significant that happens just every now and then in time, such as the passing by of a large comet. It comes and then it goes away, and then it will not happen again for a very long time. This does happen also with passage of time itself. We have just straddled 2 centuries that could not have been more different from each other than any other 2 centuries in time. The amount of change and the rate of change has been staggering. And I'm sitting in front of someone right now who can probably testify to that. He lived 3/4 of his life in the 20th century, and of course all 17 years so far in the 21st century. This condition and opportunity will soon go away as we leave the 20th century behind, much like the passing away of the comet. But for now, I have the opportunity to talk to somebody that can give us some perspective of a time that is almost past. So I'm looking forward to his story and his perspective on these 2 centuries. But before we go any further, I want to ask my guest a question. Are you ready for my question?
Okay, go ahead.
Are you famous?
In my own mind, I'm famous. I don't know how much outside of my mind.
What about in the world? Are you famous?
No.
Good. That qualifies you to be on the show.
Very good.
So let's find out who I'm talking to. What is your name?
Robert Jerome Godbout.
Robert Jerome
Yes.
Godbout. What is Godbout? What ethnicity is Godbout?
Well, the name Godbout should be pronounced Godbout. But when I was growing up, my dad got tired of explaining Godbout to people that he just changed it to Godbout. And I changed my name also, so I go by Robert Godbout and not Robert Godbout.
So the spelling is G-O-D, as in God, B-O-U-T.
Yes.
And is that a French?
That's French. That's French derivative.
So you have a lineage back to France, or is it French Canada, French Canadian?
I think it's French Canadian. I've never researched it to a D.
When were you born?
September 1932.
So help me with the math on that. That makes you how many years old?
84.
80.
I will be 85 this coming September.
And you know that's more than 3/4 of an entire century.
Yes.
That's pretty good. Can you trace your lineage back? We talked about that a moment ago. There's French Canadian. Do you know how the Godbouts came to come down to this part of the country?
I have real sketchy information because when I was a youngster, I was not interested in that phase. But I think that it came down from northern Minnesota, Iowa, in there. And for some reason, I had the idea that my ancestors gave a plot of land for a church that was built in someplace in Iowa, but I have no knowledge of it. That's just kind of osmosis as to what I've figured out over the years.
But your father and mother ended up or were born or lived in what state?
Well, as far as I know, they lived in the state of Kansas and Nebraska.
Okay. And let's find out who they are. What was your father's name?
John Alfred Godbout.
And your mother's name?
Mary Pauline Phillips.
Mary Pauline Phillips?
Yes.
And John Alfred Godbout?
Yes.
Very nice. Do you remember where they met or how they met?
No, I do not.
And do you remember when they were married?
Yes, they were married February 23rd, 1923.
1923, February 23rd. And where were they living when you were born?
They lived on a farm which was known as the Rosengarten Farm, and that was 3 miles west of Seneca, Kansas, and 4 miles south on a gravel road that connected Highway 36 with a little small town called Centralia, Kansas.
Which was outside of Seneca?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You were born onto a farm?
Yes.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had one brother, Charles Edward Godbout, and a sister, Dorothy Dolores McDonald.
Were you the oldest, middle, or youngest?
I was the youngest of the tribe.
How far apart were each of these? Charles, was he Charles? Did he have any other name?
Charles Edward.
Did he go by Charles?
He went primarily by Chuck.
By Chuck. Your sister, what did she go by?
D-E-E-E.
D-E-E-D.
Yes.
How far apart were you three? A year or two apart, or close?
Well, my sister was born in 1928, and my brother was born about 2.5 years later, and I was born in September of 1932.
So about 5 to 6 years total between the oldest and the youngest?
Yes.
Okay. How was it being the youngest?
Well, I didn't know any different, so it was great.
You guys were on a farm, and did your father own this farm?
No, we rented the farm. We were sharecroppers.
Did he ever own a farm?
In later years, he owned a farm because they had to move from the Seneca area, and they bought a farm in Holton, Kansas, which is about 30 miles straight north of Topeka on Highway 75.
Okay, so that was a little bit later in your life.
Yes, that was in 1947.
Okay, let's stay in this period right now. So what was your earliest memory that you generally have of your young life and the farm?
Well, I can remember in 1937 that my dad bought a 1931 Farmall regular tractor, and I remember being up on the second story of the house and looking down the road to down south, and my dad was driving this tractor home, and that was a real milestone when you got enough money gathered. And as far as I can remember, that he paid $600 for that tractor. And of course, back in those days, $600 was a heck of a lot of money.
This was a brand new tractor?
No, it was. We bought this tractor in 1937, and it was a 1931 model, so it was 6 years old when my dad bought it.
This was his first tractor?
Yes.
So prior to that, he
farmed with horses.
Beasts of labor. So this was a big deal in the family.
Oh, yes.
So about how old were you at this time?
Well, if I was born in 32 and this was 37, I was about 5 years old.
So that was a good time for that. Did you ever get rides on the tractor?
All the time.
Did you ever drive the tractor?
When I got older, I drove the tractor all day long.
About how old is old enough to drive a tractor?
We were still living on the Rosengarten place so I was probably about 7 or 8 years old.
7 or 8 years old, and you were driving a pretty big piece of farm equipment.
Yes. I was so short I couldn't reach the clutch, so my dad put a wooden block on the clutch so I could reach the clutch. And that's my first memory of driving the tractor.
We'll go back to farming in a minute, but that's a good first memory. Tell me about your mom and dad. Did they have brothers and sisters close by? Do you hear a beeping?
Yes. Okay, I turned it off.
All right, we had a slight interruption. So did you have a lot of uncles and aunts close by?
Well, you asked before, did I have any brothers and sisters?
Your mom and dad, did they have siblings close by that were your uncles and aunts?
My dad had a sister, Mary Vandenkamp. Well, her maiden name was Godbout. My dad had a sister, Mary, that was younger than he was. And my mom had one brother and two sisters.
And they were all in the area?
They were all in the Seneca, Baileyville.
Did you guys get together as family a lot? Holidays, Sundays? Were they close enough that you could go see them or they would come see you?
Well, we became close friends with Uncle Ralph and Aunt Sylvia. Not so much with the Phillips clan.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your farm itself. What kind of house did you live in? Tell me about your house. For example, did you have indoor plumbing?
No, indoor plumbing hadn't arrived yet.
The basic needs for water, how did you bring water into the house?
We had a cistern that caught the water as it rained on the roof.
The cistern was above ground?
Well, it was in the ground.
Oh, it was in the ground, and it caught roof water?
Yes.
From the rain?
Yes.
Do you remember how big it was? Would it last, this water supply last for a while between rains?
Well, I don't remember how big it was, but I remember that my dad would haul water from the place where we lived to a farm about a half a mile south of our farm, and my dad would about every third day would haul water, which consisted of two 50-gallon wooden barrels.
So he would go to a spring or a creek or a small stream?
Well, he would go to the farm that was a half a mile straight south of us, and the reason why they had water was because the farm was vacant. So when it rained, it caught the water in this farm well, and that was the source of water, was rainwater.
This was a farm that was not lived on, it was vacant, so
yes.
He would go over there and get that water?
Yes.
And about every 3 days he'd bring that back?
Yes.
You had to be a little bit aware of trying to conserve or save that water, correct?
Oh, yes. You didn't spill any water that you didn't need.
And that water was shared with not only the members of your family, but what about animals? We haven't talked about that. Did you have livestock?
Yes.
And the livestock, would that be their water too?
Well, it had its own separate well water. It had a well that had a pump on it that you pumped the water by hand.
For the animals?
For the animals.
But that was separate water from what you guys had?
Yes.
So you guys had cistern water from your house and water from this farm that was vacant?
Yes, well water.
Well water.
It was called well water and cistern water.
So you didn't have any plumbing in the house?
No.
Yet you had basic human needs. Where did you go to the bathroom?
Now, this is going to be a strange answer, but you went outside.
So there was a latrine, an outhouse.
It was known as the outhouse.
The outhouse. A two-seater or a one-seater?
It was a one-seater.
I never really understood the two-seater part, but you see pictures of that. Was that outhouse very far away from the house?
It was probably 75 feet.
Okay. Did you have to move it from time to time?
Yes, because it would overflow, you might say overflow.
Would you use that in the middle of the night?
You know, I don't remember getting up in the middle of the night. I remember getting up in the middle of the night for a drink of water, but going to the bathroom, that's not a memory.
Okay. But in the frigid winter, that was still the place you went to?
Well, you had a a bucket that was shaped like the top of a commode. So you went behind the kitchen stove where it was warmer, and that's where you went to the bathroom.
Oh, so there was a receptacle in the house. Was there a slang term for that bucket?
Potty.
The potty? Okay.
The potty.
And who got to empty that?
Well, my dad would do that.
That was a fatherly chore.
Yes.
Okay. Did you guys have refrigeration?
No refrigeration. I can remember when we got our first ice house, ice chest.
An ice chest?
Yes.
And where would the ice come from?
From town. They had an ice house in town next to the railroad track. So evidently they must have brought the ice in.
So you didn't have
rail.
to. So you didn't have to cut ice and try to store it off of ponds and try to store it throughout the summer like
No.
some of the versions of the ice houses that I've heard about?
No.
Okay. Did you have electricity?
No electricity. I was born in 1932, and we never got electricity until 1947.
What did you
41.
do? What did you do for light in the evenings?
You had a coal oil lamp.
Hold on, somebody's at the door.
Yes.
Hi. Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to invite him for exercise. Carry on.
Okay, yeah,
Sorry.
thanks.
We're busy.
I know, I see it.
That was the exercise lady.
Oh, yeah, she looks with a lot of energy.
Yeah, she's going to Hawaii for her 31st wedding anniversary in about 3 weeks.
Wow, that's good. Back to the light. So you had a coal oil lamp. Did you had a couple of them?
Yes, we had two at least. So if you went from one room to another, well, you carried the lamp with you.
So people tended to hover around the light source.
Oh yes.
Nobody sat in the dark. Would that be late evenings? Would you guys stay up late or eat and go to bed, especially in the wintertime when it was dark? Once it got dark, what would happen around the house?
Once it got dark, you more or less sort of called it a day and went to bed early.
Can you tell me about what time that would be?
Well, I can remember going to bed about the same time as sunset.
Would that cause you to be up early in the mornings?
I don't remember getting up all that early in the morning, but I evidently did because I remember getting dressed behind the kitchen stove where it was warmer.
Who was first to get up in the house?
Well, Dad was.
In the wintertime, was the house pretty cold in the mornings?
Yes.
Would that be one of his jobs to put some heat into the house?
That was one of his jobs was to put in fresh wood into the stove.
Was the stove the primary source of heat?
Yes.
So the stove had a function for cooking and for heating the house.
And also hanging off the side was a metal container which would hold about 6 gallons of water, and it would gradually get warm when you...
And what would that water be used for? Just...
wash the dishes and cooking.
Okay, that was your warm water source.
Yes.
How often would you bathe then?
Well, Saturday was a big day. Normally, unless something really happened, it was a Saturday night ritual.
Okay, the venerable Saturday night bath.
Yes.
And would everybody take one on Saturday night?
Yes.
So was it a desirable spot to be the first? Would they change the water out?
They would just add water to it.
Okay.
They didn't change it out. They just add water to it.
So there were 5 of you in the house. If somebody was number 5 in the bath water.
That was usually Dad or Mom.
Okay. It wasn't you being the youngest.
No.
Okay.
I was probably number 1.
And where was this? You mentioned behind the stove. There must have been room behind the stove. Is that where the bathtub or the bathing took place?
Yes.
Can you describe the bathtub itself? Must not have been very large.
Well, you had a bathtub, and it was probably 2.5 feet square, and it was probably 12 inches or so deep. So you wouldn't fill it up clear up to the top because that took too much water.
But this is being done by the stove. So in the wintertime, the air around the stove was warm.
Yes,
Okay.
that was the warmest in the room.
And where was everybody else when it was your turn or their turn to take a bath? Were they
Probably sitting at the kitchen table doing something.
And
maybe it was reading a book or something.
Nobody was paying attention to you in the bathtub. That was just part of getting clean for the week.
That was part of the ritual.
Yeah. Okay. Here comes a lawnmower. Okay, I'm just going to deviate a little bit because we just had a lawnmower go by. And let me ask you, did you guys ever cut your yard on the farm?
Well, you used a big mower, which was not all that big in today's standard because it was only a 5-foot sickle bar.
Here it comes again. The sounds of modern society.
Yes.
Okay.
No brush hog.
All right, you said earlier that, well, you didn't know any different. So these were conveniences, indoor plumbing, electricity, water, heat, that were sparse compared to today. You didn't really feel these things as a child were hardships, correct?
That's right.
Tell me a little bit about your farmhouse, the first one that you were in. Was it a single story, a double story? How many bedrooms did it have?
It was a double story, and it had 1 bedroom downstairs and 2 bedroom upstairs. It was a 2-story farmhouse.
So your mom and dad slept downstairs?
As I remembered, yes.
You and your brother shared a room?
Yes, and my sister had sort of a private room herself up on the 2nd floor.
Was there any heat on the 2nd floor in the wintertime?
No, only heat was what rose naturally through the air.
So sometimes was it pretty cold up there at night when you went to bed?
Yes, sometimes my dad would wrap bricks in newspaper and would warm the bricks before we wrapped it in newspaper. And we'd get in bed and our feet would be warm because we had the bricks.
He would place hot bricks in the bed before you went to bed?
Yes, and that would keep your feet warm for a while, but then pretty soon they also got cold. But you had plenty of blankets.
A lot of quilts.
Yes.
And then that eventually got you to sleep.
Yes.
What was your early childhood like? Were you asked to do chores around the farm pretty early, or did you have a certain amount of time where you were allowed to just play and be a kid?
As soon as you got big enough to do chores, you did chores.
And what kind of chores does a young tyke do?
Well, since we heated with corn cobs, you went out to the hog pen with a bushel basket, and you picked up cobs, and you put them in a basket, and you took the basket into the house, and that was your heat source for the stove.
So you brought in the fuel. What else? Did you guys have a vegetable garden?
In the summertime, yes, we did.
Did you ever work in that, perhaps pulling weeds?
All the time.
What kind of things were raised in the garden?
Well, your typical onions, radishes, lettuce, tomatoes, sweet corn.
Who would own the garden? Who did most of was this your dad or your mom or your older sister, or it was a family?
That was a family affair.
Did you consume or eat most of what you grow?
You ate almost all of what you grew.
Did your mom can vegetables?
Yes.
And did she can meat?
Yes, but I don't know how she did it because she didn't have a refrigerator to keep it cold.
Okay, so she had to plan food preparation around the fact that you could not just stick things back in the refrigerator. You had to pretty much eat what you made, correct? Or things would go bad.
That's right.
How would you keep milk and butter fresh?
Well, on the milk, you would put it into the farm tank, which had water in it, and it would somewhat cool. But primarily, you drank what you didn't use for cooking.
Did you guys make your own butter?
I kind of remember churning butter, but I'm kind of hazy about that.
Okay. Let's talk about the animals that you had. What kind of animals do you remember?
Well, we had hogs, cattle, and once we got the tractor, then we had a team of mules.
So you had the mules after the tractor?
We had the mules before we got the tractor.
Ah, I misunderstood you. So the mules did a lot of the farm work. Do you remember their names?
Well, we had two mules. One was a gelding, which means he was a castrated horse, which was a castrated mule, and his name was Pete. And then we had a whitish gray female mule, and her name was Jenny.
So Pete and Jenny. Did you have them a long time?
We had them for a long time. We had them when I was born, and I remember having them even on our farm down in Holton, Kansas.
So they were on a couple of farms with you?
They were on the Rosengarten farm, they were on the Kane farm, and they were on the Holton farm.
They almost felt like they were part of the family to a degree, even though they were mules.
Well, that's true.
Did they have personalities?
Very much so.
Pete was a little bit different from Jenny. Jenny was a little bit different from Pete.
Yes.
And
Pete was very ornery.
Was he a kicker?
If you got too close to him and spooked him, he would kick you.
But was he also stubborn, as is the traditional stereotype for mules? Stubborn as a mule?
He was very stubborn.
And did he get along okay with Jenny?
Yes, he got along very well with Jenny.
And Jenny was a little bit more reasonable.
Yes, she was more docile.
And what was it that they would do? Would they pull a plow? Would they obviously pull wagons with the other equipment?
Well, they would pull wagons. Primarily, they would pull wagons with grain, with corn and oats, and not so much the wheat. The wheat would be sold into town as it was harvested.
Okay. Before the tractor, how did you plow or till the earth?
Well, before the tractor, we had about 4 horses.
Okay.
And they would pull the plow.
So Pete and Jenny, wagons, and then the horses would plow and till.
Yes.
Do you remember, did the horses have names too?
I don't remember the horses' names.
Okay. Did you ever ride the horses?
Not really, because they were just kind of plodding along, and you couldn't get them to run very fast.
Okay. Were Pete and Jenny more part of the family than the horses, since the horses, you don't recall their names?
Yes, very much so.
How many acres was the typical farm?
Well, back in those days, the typical farm was 160 acres, which is 1/4 of a square mile.
And what all did your dad raise on the farm?
Wheat, corn, and oats.
Would he sell all of those, or were some of those for the animals and yourself?
He would sell the wheat because the wheat would not be very good for the animals, because they would, if they ate too much wheat, well, then that would expand in their stomach and make them sick.
Okay, and there was a market for wheat.
There was a market for wheat.
What about the corn?
We kept most of the corn and most of the oats to feed the cattle and to feed the
That was
mules.
okay. So the cattle, how many head of cattle did you have?
Well, I'm guessing. I would say we had about 20 head.
And were they for milk?
Yes, primarily for milk.
Was there a milk truck that came around to collect the milk?
If you had enough milk left over there, yes, they'd send a truck out to get the milk.
When you say leftover, so were you, your family, you guys drank the milk and used it for other things as opposed to selling it?
Yes, yes.
Therefore, you had to milk cows as a part of your daily chores?
Yes, we did.
How many times a day?
Twice a day.
How early in the morning?
Probably say someplace around 6:30.
Was that one of the first things you would do in the morning?
That plus you also had to feed the animals too.
Okay. So your morning started pretty early, and I'm assuming you went to school. We'll talk about school here in a minute. So you had a number of farm chores to do in the morning. Your dad, your sister Dee, your brother Chuck, and yourself were all working
pretty much so.
In the morning. And you had to get the cows done. When did you milk them later in the day?
Later in the day, you milked them around 5:30.
Okay.
In the evening.
Between milkings, you turned them out. Were they grazers in the pasture?
Yes, they were.
So in the morning, were they there for you in the morning, or did somebody have to go out and get them?
Well, primarily they were there for you in the morning because they knew that they would get grain to supplement their hay.
So they would come in for feed?
Yes, they would. They would be standing at the gate waiting for you to bring them.
They were waiting for you. You didn't have to go get them.
That's right.
So their stomachs ruled.
That's right. The cow's got 3 stomachs.
Well, that's right. 3 stomachs. Can you give us a quick lesson on that?
Well, it has to do with Mother Nature. That's just the way they're built.
Okay. Nothing special about that.
No.
Did you buy the cattle, or did you have a bull? How did you keep the herd going?
We had a bull, and you would keep the calves when the calves were born.
And on average, how many calves would be born a year?
Well, that depends on how many cows that you had.
Okay.
So
would each cow mostly reproduce once a year, or was it every other year?
No, they would produce about once a year.
Okay. And that was the bull's primary job, was to keep the herd going.
That's right.
And was the bull easy to get along with?
Some of them were and some of them weren't. Some of them were, especially a Holstein bull can get really, really mean and vicious. Whereas you take a bull that is from a Hereford cow, they're more docile. They just kind of plod along, and they make very good pets. But a Holstein bull, you want to be careful. And not get too close to a Holstein bull.
So the breed made a difference. So the Holstein bull was kind of a rascally, mean bull.
That's right.
And the Hereford bull was a little bit more docile.
That's right.
Did you have to keep the bull in a pen, or did the bull get to kind of do whatever he wanted out in the fields?
Well, for the most part, since we had a small herd, the bull kind of he just kind of got the run of the pasture with the cows.
As a farm child, did you have anything to do with the bull, or is that left up to your dad?
That was left up to Dad and the neighbor guy.
Would the neighbors share bulls at all, or does everybody have their own?
No, they would share between theirs.
Okay. And I guess part of that would be to keep the gene pool fresh, right? You would use different bulls.
Yeah. You didn't want to expose the bull to too many cows.
Right. Let's talk about your pigs. How many pigs?
Well, you'd probably be talking about 25 or 30 little weaning pigs.
Okay. Would you eat the pigs and the cows and the bull?
We ate the pigs, but we didn't eat the cows or the bulls.
And why is that? I'm going to guess it had something to do with economics.
Well, it was just easier to butcher a hog than it was to butcher a cow or a calf.
I was going to guess that maybe the cow was giving you milk.
Well, you wouldn't want to butcher a cow that was giving a lot of milk. You'd want to kind of, you would want to kind of cull out the marginal cows and keep only the good producing cow milk.
What would you do with the marginal cows?
Ship them off to market.
So those were sold?
They were sold to a auction company in St. Joe, Missouri.
So tell me a little bit about butchering the hogs. Was it done at a certain time of the year? Did weather have anything to do with it?
Yes, it did. You couldn't do it in the summertime because you couldn't get the meat cold. But in the wintertime, that would be the time like around in November, Thanksgiving, early December. You'd catch a cold day, and that's when you would want to butcher.
And would you butcher several at a time, or was it to butcher one?
Well, you couldn't butcher too much because you couldn't eat the meat fast enough.
Okay. And
my idea of a butcher day would be to have hog liver for breakfast the next day.
Hog liver for breakfast?
Yes.
That sounds like it's a delicacy.
Well, to us on the farm it was. Mom would take a piece of liver and coat it with flour and fry it in a skillet, and that was a treat for the day after butchering day.
So was that a term called butchering day?
Yes, to a certain extent it was.
So it was talked about tomorrow we're going to butcher a hog, and was that kind of a big event, or it just was sort of standard farm practice?
It was kind of a big event.
Okay.
Really,
can you talk a little bit about that day and what went on?
Well, you had to pin up the hogs, and then you pick out a one that looked a bit nice, not nice, fat. Had a lot of fat on it, on its hindquarters, which is where you got a nice ham. And they would take a rifle and shoot the hog. Sounds kind of barbaric now, but that was just the way it was done. And then they would string it up on a tree, and then got the inside
by its hind feet.
Yeah, by its hind feet. Yeah, and there's a tendon that runs in their back legs. And that's really tough. So that's how you strung it up. And you'd have what was known as a block and tackle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you would string the hog up, and then you would gut the hog and keep everything as clean as you could. And have a vat of hot water. So that's how you would sanitize the hog.
Did the hogs have hair?
Yeah, they had a skin
and
hair, and you had a nice sharp butcher knife, and you would trim the hair. That was very labor intensive.
Mm-hmm. And so you would gut it and skin it, and then lower it to the ground, and then probably saw. Did you use a saw at that point in time to dismember some of the major bones?
I remember my dad using a meat saw.
Okay. And then when you got down to cutting it into the cuts of meat that we're used to today, like the ham and the shoulder, that was a pretty standard practice. You would eventually cut up the hog in the same way.
Yes.
Did you learn how to do that, or was this all your dad?
That was usually my dad, my mother.
Okay. What were you guys doing, watching or standing by, or you were off doing other things?
No, we were standing by when they needed some extra help, like pulling up the block and tackle. So yeah, you didn't go out and play during that time.
Okay, so that was a day-long event. Here's a funny question. So you pulled one of the pigs out from the small herd that you had, and you butchered him away from the herd.
Right.
And I don't even know if it's a herd or not. Any idea if the hogs had any notion of they were about to be slaughtered or that slaughtering was going on? I know, kind of a crazy question, but...
Well, I don't know if they did or not, but as a general rule, you didn't make too many pets out of your hogs.
They had no names.
Because, yeah, they no names because you knew sooner or later that you'd be killing them and saving the meat.
Right.
So you just didn't get too close.
Okay. So it would take about a day to do this whole process.
Yeah, it was a good day.
And you mentioned that it was something you did in the wintertime because of the coldness, so you didn't butcher in the summertime. What did you do for meat over the summer?
Well, I can remember that we would go into town and buy some processed meat, but you would eat almost everything that you bought.
Okay. So you had cows, horses, mules. Did we talk about chickens? Did you have chickens?
We had chickens also.
On average, how many would you have at a time?
Every spring we would buy about 500 little chickies.
500.
Yeah, about 500.
That's a lot.
We would go to a hatchery in Sabetha, Kansas, known as Backenstedt's, and we'd buy 500. And you can get 500 chickens in a small container. It sounds kind of gross, but they would just be
packed in there.
Yeah, packed in there.
Sounds more cozy than bad. And a lot of chirping.
A lot of chirping.
Okay. And was that kind of a fun day to go over there? Did you go over with them? And
oh yeah, that was a fun day.
Yeah.
You're driving home, you'd have those big pasteboard cartons, and
with holes cut in them.
Yeah, and they would chirp all the way home, and you'd get them out and put them in, and you had what was called a brooder.
Mm-hmm. A brooder.
And that would be warm, and those chickies would feel the warmth, and you had to take out each one individually and drip it in a water container so it knew where to go to get the water.
Oh, you had to show them one time.
Yeah, yeah, that was about all you had to show them just one time, and they knew where the heat source was.
500. So your family bought 500, and then the next family bought 500 or 400 or 600. So this place that you went to buy these chickens, they must have had a lot of little chickens.
I think they did. Now, I was little when we was doing all that. So.
Right.
But that was a big deal.
These chickens were for egg production?
Yes.
Did you sell eggs?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And of course, they also were for a Sunday dinner?
So that's right.
And how long would 500 chickens last?
Well, there'd be a certain percent of those that would be male roosters.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as they got big to eat, then we'd start eating chicken. We'd have chicken every day.
The roosters were the first to hit the plates, to hit your dinner plates. And then eventually they would be gone. So the roosters weren't used for reproduction?
No.
Okay. They just came with the 500 chickens?
They came with the 500 chicken.
Was the roosters, their behavior different from the hens?
Well, they were more rowdy, you might say.
Okay. And were the roosters ever, as a young child, did they ever chase you around?
All the time. And you could usually pick out a rooster that would be mean, and they would pick on you. And of course, you were small, so that, chicken, they looked huge to you.
So you didn't mind eating the rooster that pecked you?
Oh, no. That was a treat.
Okay. So, chickens, roosters, hens and roosters, pigs, cows. That was the livestock. And then you had, for work purposes, you had Pete and Jenny and a couple of horses.
Usually had about 4 horses.
Okay. And sheep or goats?
No sheep, no goats.
Any other animals that you raised than what I just mentioned?
Well, the neighbors had a flock of guinea pigs, guineas.
What were those raised for?
Just kind of a novelty.
Okay.
There was about 15 of them, and they'd all grouped together, and they had their own noise makers. They were just kind of a added attraction of the farm.
You had a lot of life on that farm, in the animals. Of all of those animals, did you like taking care of any of them in particular, or dislike the pigs, or it all was just chores?
Well, it's just kind of an all choice.
Okay.
You had to take care of all of them.
Okay. And that was nonstop every day. You had to do some stuff.
Every day, every morning you did.
All right. So let's talk about that in school every morning. So you would get up and do some chores, and then the 3 of you would head off to school. Can you tell me a little bit about your school life, the school that you went to? Was it a one-room school, multiple-room schools?
Well, when I was in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, it was just a one-room school. And there's just one teacher, one female lady. And in my class, there was Patricia Holthouse, Lois Cross, and myself. That made up the 1st class. And then each class up through the 8th grade was probably about 2 or 3 or 4 kids.
And you all stayed together through all 8 grades?
Yeah. There's just a one-room schoolhouse, and the desks were bigger in the back of the room than they were in the front of the room.
How would I always wonder about this, how would a teacher actually manage the day? Because the 1st graders and the 8th graders were learning different things and, more complicated. So how would she address 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and on up? What would the 8th graders be doing when the 1st graders were being taught?
Well, they'd probably be doing some art projects that were not messy or anything like that. And across the front of the room, you had the teacher's desk at the front of the room with a big blackboard behind her. And then you had each class. She talked to the 1st graders first, and there was a recitation table across the front of the room, so you would get up from your desk and walk to the front of the room and sit down at this recitation. Mm-hmm. And the teacher would, teach the 1st grade subject, and then they would go back and you'd go back and sit down at your desk, and then she'd get the 2nd graders, and then when she got through with them, they would go back and sit in their desks.
So I think I understand. So because the class sizes are small, each class would come forward and spend some time with her.
Right.
A little bit in close proximity while the rest of the people were doing some assignments or some homework. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you like being in the same room with the older kids?
Yeah, it seemed like that at recess time you all kind of got to play together. And for the most part, there was no discipline problems.
Okay. And the one-room schoolhouse had a stove in it.
Yes, it had a stove in it, and it had wood piles stacked outside the store.
Okay.
Outside the room.
Okay. And there was, of course, an outhouse there outside.
Yeah, there was 2 outhouses, one for the girls and one for the boys.
Okay. And at recess time, was there any playground equipment or anything? Did you guys play ball or run around or?
Well, there's some playground equipment, like some ball and basketball, but there was no court or anything like that.
And the teacher, where would the teacher come from? Was she a local woman? I'm assuming that most of the time it was a woman. Or did they come in from someplace? Were they educated to be teachers?
Well, I just remember that there was a neighbor lady that was a teacher, and she was really, really good at it. And everybody wanted to hire her because there was a number of different one-room schoolhouses, situated in the countryside. And her name was Mrs. Mergermeyer. And I think she was married, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
But,
did you like school?
Yeah, for the most part I did.
Uh-huh. You attended the same school even though you moved a couple of times, or did you go to a couple of different schools?
Well, in my case, my first, second, and third grade was in this one-room schoolhouse. Mm-hmm. So there was other classes that had the one-room schoolhouse experience. But when we moved from the Rosengarten farm to a farm called the Kane Farm, Cakane name farm, well, the bus out of Baileyville, Kansas, came right by the front door. So we transferred from the one-room schoolhouse to the school that was picked up by the bus.
So before that, you would walk to school?
Yes, or else Mom or Dad would take us to school.
Okay. Where did you go to high school then? Tell me about high school, and was that a larger school?
Well, I graduated from the 8th grade in a little small town called Baileyville, Kansas, which was straight west of Seneca on Highway 36. And that was, I graduated from 8th grade, which was a parochial school, and the nuns out of Atchison, Kansas, St. Benedictine nuns, taught us. And then I went my freshman class in the Baileyville school, but since we moved on the farm, so in 1947 was when I transferred from Baileyville school to a town north of Topeka called Holton, Holton, and I finished out my sophomore, junior, and senior year in Holton, Kansas.
Okay, and did the same 3 other students that you had in first grade also go with you to high school? You mentioned their names earlier.
Yes, I mentioned Lois Cross. Well, Patty Holdhouse did. Lois Cross. Patty and I were Catholic, and Lois was Protestant, some Protestant faith. So she went to a high school that was sponsored by her faith, whereas Patty and I, we went to a parochial school.
Okay.
So I graduated in 1950 from a public school in Holton, Kansas, and Patty went to a parochial school in Seneca, Kansas.
Okay, and we're going to come back to this in a minute. While we're still in your childhood, tell me about Christmases around the house. What was Christmas like?
Well, number one, you couldn't wait till it got here. I just remember that.
Santa Claus was part of the childhood youth?
Yeah, Santa Claus was a big part of the deal.
Uh-huh.
And
would you write letters to Santa Claus?
Every night.
And
because your desire changed every night.
And was there a wish book, like a Sears catalog or anything?
Well, there was a Sears and a Monkey Ward Christmas catalog, just identified as a Christmas catalog. And I used to just pore over that thing every night, change my mind about because you only got one gift. That's all you got, one gift.
Okay, was Christmas celebrated on Christmas Eve or Christmas morning, or did it switch back and forth?
Well, it was usually, since I was small and my sister and brother, we were small, Christmas was celebrated on Christmas Day, early in the morning. And as we got older, well, then we went to midnight mass. But that was
on Christmas Eve. You'd go to midnight mass.
Yeah, that was a big deal. Christmas was a big deal. Usually you went to Uncle Ralph and Aunt Sylvia's place. And
on Christmas Day for Christmas.
On Christmas Day for a big feed.
For a big dinner.
Big dinner. You didn't exchange gifts too much because nobody had any money.
Mm-hmm. But you got together and you ate real well.
Yeah, extremely well.
Right. So you had that same feeling that I think goes on today, which was it was hard for you to get to sleep because Santa Claus was coming and you woke up the next morning. Did you guys have a tree?
Oh, we had a tree every year. Every year.
And since you didn't have electricity for a while, how would you decorate the tree? What was it consisted of? Strings of popcorn and
strings
other
of popcorn
ornaments?
And orange peelings and just whatever you could find around the house. There was no electricity on the tree or anything like that.
And
no candles.
Did you all decorate the tree in one setting, one afternoon or one evening?
Well, primarily just one evening.
Mm-hmm. And that was kind of a special time.
Oh, that was a real special time.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall a favorite gift that Santa Claus brought you?
Yes, it was back in those days. That was about 1942, 43, 40, 44, and they'd have these kits of these airplanes. And I remember getting a kit on a airplane, a Thunderbolt P-47. I still remember getting it as a special gift.
And you flew that around the farm constantly?
Well, you didn't fly it very far because the damn thing fell apart.
No, but in your own way, you flew that around.
Yeah.
So was your father a hard worker and your mom a hard worker?
As I remember them, they were.
Mm-hmm. Did they get along pretty well?
Well, to my eyes, they did.
Uh-huh. Did you ever see them dance together?
Yeah, at weddings.
Mm-hmm. Were they affectionate to each other openly, or was that just not the farm way? It was pretty much all business.
That was primarily not the farm way.
Okay. But they got along well.
To my knowledge, they did.
Yes. Tell me about town. Was Seneca the town that you guys went into mostly?
Mostly, it was the largest town around.
And how far away was it?
It was about 7 miles.
And you guys had a car?
We had a 29 Model A Ford.
So you take the car into town. How often would you go into town?
Well, you went to town every Saturday night.
Okay.
Saturday, especially in the summertime, was a big deal about going to town on Saturday night.
And what would you do? Shopping?
Well, yeah. Mom would have a grocery list and go into Bealey's Market, M-E-A-L-Y, Bealey Market.
Mm-hmm.
And
your dad would go to the hardware store or the feed store?
The hardware store and pick out stuff and just make a shopping tour.
Uh-huh. And what was the primary farm? Was there an implement dealer or a feed store or something that catered to the farm needs that you guys would go to?
Well, there was a implement dealership that you could buy parts for your disc and your plow and your harrow.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was like a feed store. So
would your mom and dad split up when you went to town, and he would go do his thing and she would go do her thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, primarily they would split.
Was there a tavern in town?
Well, there's a pool hall, what was known as the pool hall.
Mm-hmm.
guys would go in and play pool and drink beer.
Uh-huh. And was that ever your dad? Did he ever take a break and go have a couple beers at the tavern?
Not that I really remember.
Okay. And were there holiday-like gatherings, 4th of July or Memorial Day, where people would come together and the town would appear festive, or everybody was taking a break from their routine lives?
Well, that was primarily in Seneca because it had at the tail end of Main Street, it had a park, and it had a round bandstand in the park, and they would have a short program of band music, and there was usually some outfit that came in with a merry-go-round and a Ferris wheel, and they would block off a couple of blocks of Main Street, and this company would set up in this 2 blocks off of Main Street, and I can still remember the music from the carousel. That was a big deal.
And your family went to church?
Oh yes, that was the focal point.
Every Sunday?
Every Sunday.
And you were what faith?
Well, it's Catholic.
Okay. Were you in generally a Catholic community, or were there other religions?
Well, we were primarily the only religion, and Catholic was the predominant religion.
Besides serving your spiritual needs, did the church serve the community any other way socially? Did they have dances or dinners or?
Well, the big deal was a wedding, and the wedding would start out about 9 o'clock in the morning at St. Peter's and Paul Church, and then they would have a dinner, and then they would have a snack, and then if it was a rural girl, well then the women folks would all congregate in the house, and the men folks would all congregate in the garage. So, and then at 9 o'clock at night in the parish hall, they would have an orchestra. Well, to me it was an orchestra, but it was probably just a couple of guitars and an accordion and a drum set. But they would have a free-for-all dance for everybody from 9 o'clock until midnight.
So the weddings were kind of important. First of all, everybody knew everybody, I would say, or a lot of people knew a lot of people. So when somebody got married, almost everybody was invited, I guess. Was that the case? Because it was it was somewhat social in addition to the celebration of this wedding.
That's right. That's right. It was it was the social point. Lots of activity on that special day. And then somebody would get too much to drink at the dance, and somebody would get into a fight and all that. It was, I mean, I was just a little kid at that time.
Right. So, did you get along well with your brother and sister?
Well, I was probably closer to my sister than I was my brother.
Mm-hmm. And you all shared chores equally around the farm?
Well, I thought we did.
So let's go back to high school. So you went from grade school and then you went into high school. Did you have a girlfriend in high school along the way?
Yes.
A sweetheart?
Yes, well, as a freshman. As a junior, senior. And probably when I was a junior, I would miss a lot of school, and because I was helping Dad on the farm. But when I got to be a senior, then I had a steady girlfriend, and I had perfect attendance. So I don't know how I wangled that, but I told Dad, I said I just can't miss anymore. But I I went from an attendance problem to a perfect attendance, and that was all because I had a special girlfriend.
What was her name?
Her name was Virginia.
Any idea where she went on to life? Did you keep in touch or hear about her from time to time?
Well, I graduated in 1950, and I joined the Navy in February 1952 and got out in 1956. And while I was in the Navy, she got married and had a couple of kids, and still lives up in the Holton area. And I talk to her every once in a while. Her husband died of cancer about 5 or 6 years ago.
She's still alive?
And she's still alive.
Mm-hmm.
So.
How did you date in those times? You didn't have your own car. Was it sort of just an acknowledgement of I like you and you like me and let's hold some hands? Or did you go to the movies? Or
plus, we had a 1938 Chevrolet 2-door, so I had access to a car all during my high school days. And it was kind of like everybody went to the movie on a Sunday night. No matter what they were showing, you went to the movie. So that was a social contact.
Okay.
And then Holton is kind of a rural area. In fact, there's an Indian reservation north of Topeka, and I think it's Potawatomis, but I'm not sure. But that's... Yeah, I got out of the Navy in 56, so I had 4 years.
Okay, so let's talk about that because there's a couple of subjects that just happened. One was weddings, and it seemed like the local boy and the local girl got married, probably sweethearts in high school, correct?
Right.
And a lot of people, I'm just guessing, got married fairly young.
Yeah, the youngness would probably be part of it.
Okay. And these folks that married out of high school, did many of them stay on and continue to farm or live in that area?
Probably 10% stayed on the farm, and the other 90% went to Kansas City or a lot of the kids, especially the boys, went to K-State and Manhattan.
Okay. And okay, so that's kind of high. I thought maybe it would have been more people stayed, but so there was flight away from the farm life and the town life, and that included you. So you graduated what year from high school?
1950.
And you said you went to the Navy in 1952, so you had a 2-year gap in there. What did you do in those 2 years? By the way, your brother and sister, had they moved on?
They had moved on. My sister graduated. And she was down here in Kansas City in nurses training.
Mm-hmm.
And then after I got out of high school, on a Wednesday, and I went to work for the local grocery store, which was back in those days known as the A&P grocery store.
The A&P, yes.
A&P.
And this was in Seneca?
And this was in Holton.
In Holton, I'm sorry.
In Holton.
And you were a grocery store employee, so you stocked the shelves and you rang up people.
Ran the cash register and swept the floor and just did everything.
So you knew everybody in town because everybody shopped there? Okay.
Yeah.
And
now, what's kind of ironic, there was a certain amount of cliquiness in the high school as a senior.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys that were the in crowd in senior and high, the athletic, they all left and went to college, and the rest of us did not go to college. And in later years, all of the guys that went to college, that left from high school and went to college, they all primarily moved back to Holton and lived in Holton. And the guys like myself that went in the service and then went to college afterwards and all that, we all left and are scattered all over the country. So that
That's kind of interesting. Do you have any theory as to why these two groups would have swapped each other out?
I don't, no, I really don't have any theory, except I think they kind of had a hankering to come back to their roots more than the rest of us did.
Okay. So the 2 years at the grocery store, what gave you the idea that you wanted to go in the Navy?
Well, that was during the Korean War, and you had the draft, and you either had to wait for the draft and get drafted in the Army and go to Korea, or you had to take your chances and enlist, and I enlisted in the Navy. And that was primarily because there was an older gentleman that had been in the Navy that had retired, that came in the store about every other day, and I got to know him, and I got kind of interested in the Navy. So I would say that primarily he was the reason that if I had to do it over again, I would join the Air Force instead of the Navy.
And why is that?
Well, the Navy, they take you from port to port on a damn bathtub, rough seas and dirt, storms and things. And the Air Force, they fly you every,
So you did some ocean time in the Navy. You really were a sailor.
Yes.
Did you like the Navy?
When I was in the Navy, yes, I did like it.
Did you consider staying in?
Just briefly, not too much. I would say very briefly.
And was the Navy a life changer for you at all? First of all, what did you do? What was your job?
Well, I went to San Diego for boot camp. After boot camp, I went to Baltimore, Maryland for service school. And then from after I left Baltimore, I got assigned to the Great Lakes Naval Training Center. And ironically, my duty was in the shift in the brig. So I worked in the brig for about 2 years, and then I got assigned to
And the brig is the lockdown for
yes,
rascals.
yes, yeah, that would be the Great Lakes brig was the brig for the 9th Naval District, which is the gut of the United States. Your dad was in the Navy. I think he was in the Navy. And I spent 2.5 years up at Great Lakes, and then I got assigned to a ship out of San Diego, and I went to Japan, to Tokyo.
So this sounds like a lot of brand new things for a farm boy. First of all, San Diego, and then to the other side of the coast. Were these wide-eyed events for you when you left Seneca and Holton primarily before this?
Oh yes, yeah.
So you were seeing the world for the first time as a 18 or 19-year-old?
I was 19 when I went into service, and I remember going by bus from the bus station in Holton, and reporting to the naval station down in San Diego. And I remember getting off the bus. Of course, this was in February. When we left Holton, it was colder than hell. It was raining and all that. And then when I got to San Diego, and I remember stepping off the bus and stepped right underneath a great, huge palm tree. And I thought that was...
You had never seen one of those before?
Hell no.
Can you tell me what it was like when you first laid eyes on the Pacific Ocean?
Well, I was just amazed at the size of it. I mean, there was water everywhere.
And the color?
Yeah, the color too. Yeah.
So when you eventually went to sea, did you like being on the ocean on a ship? Seems like that would be kind of exciting and fun.
Well, It's fun as long as the ocean is pretty quiet. But it's a hell of a place. And see, the ship that I was on, in fact, when we get through here, it's hanging up on there on the wall up there. But it's a small ship as compared to an aircraft carrier. And it's a landing ship tank, LST, what they call LST. Mm-hmm. And it's flat on the bottom, so you can run the thing up on the shore, open the bow doors, and you can walk from the ship into dry land. But the only problem is it doesn't draft very much water. So if the sea is rough, it's really rough.
It's going to bop around like a cork.
Like a bathtub. Yeah.
Okay, so you were in the Navy 4 years.
I got out in 1956.
What happened from there?
Well, I couldn't go back to Holton because the A&P store had closed down. There wasn't any jobs in Holton.
Was your mom and dad farming at that time?
No, they had left in... See, that was in 1956. They sold the farm in 1954. So they were out of the farming business.
And where did they go?
Well, they came down to Kansas City.
Okay. So if they had still been on the farm, or if the A&P had still been open, would you have considered going back? Was there farm life, small town life in your bones at that point in time, or had there been, and the Navy experience, what if you had the chance, would you have gone back?
Ultimately, I don't think I would have, because there was nothing there.
If your dad had owned the farm and he was aging, did you like farm life enough? It seems like, it feels like you enjoyed your childhood and being around the animals and such. Is that true, or am I just putting that on you?
I think it's about half true.
Okay.
There was a certain tug, you might say, for about half truth and the other half that...
So if your dad had still owned the farm and you come out of the Navy, there's not really a 100% chance, maybe even 50, that you would have gone back to take that over.
I don't think so.
Okay. Where did you land then after the Navy?
Well, then I moved in with my folks.
In Kansas City?
In Kansas City.
Mm-hmm. And they were glad to have you back?
Well, they didn't say, but I moved in anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did they adapt to city life, large city life? Kansas City is quite a bit bigger than... So a couple things happened. They're off the farm. They're no longer doing what they knew how to do for all of their lives. They are out of the area that they were familiar with, and they were down in Kansas City, which is about 75 miles away, I guess. How did you find your parents when you returned from the Navy? And you were a little bit different yourself, so you all were kind of starting...
I was 23 when I got out, mm-hmm. And I moved back in with my parents when I was 23.
Mm-hmm. And how was that?
Well, I knew that there was nothing left back in Holton. And my high school sweetheart had gotten married and had a couple kids by that time. So that was completely over. And since I had worked for A&P before I went in the Navy, they had to give me a job back. I applied at Bendix, and they weren't hiring anybody at that time. So I went back to A&P, and I started work at 39th and Prospect.
So you continued your recontinued your grocery career, but now in Kansas City?
That's right.
A little bit different kind of store from the local Holton farm A&P. Now you're down in the big city.
Yes. And I first started out at the A&P store in 75th and Main Street, which is the Waldo area. And then I got transferred to the 39th and Prospect they had an opening down there, and
What was your mom and dad doing at this time? Were they retired?
my mom was working as a cook in the mission Catholic parochial school.
Okay.
And my dad was working for Milgram's grocery store,
Okay.
stocking shelves on the night shift.
Did he easily adapt to this city life and working for somebody else after all of those years of working for himself?
You know, I think he did, because his final days on the farm, he was by himself. My brother had left, and I had left. My sister was down here. Your mom was down here. And I think he kind of liked just getting in his car and driving into work at the evening, no chores to do. I think he liked that.
Did you have any further education?
Well, the 39th and Prospect A&P store that I went to, they hired a number of part-time boys and girls, young men and women, in the summertime, and they were all college students. And long about August, well, then I kind of got to know them, but all of them were leaving and going back to school. And I was kind of sitting there, sitting high and dry all by myself. And, well, let me back up. Initially, when I got out of the Navy, I went and applied to Rockhurst College and went to day school and lasted 2 weeks, and then I quit.
School wasn't for you at that time?
At that time, it was not.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just came out of the Navy, and my last 2 weeks was in a separation center in San Francisco. Didn't have anything to do all day long and just kind of putted around. And then when I got to Rockhurst for day school, assignment this, assignment that, and hell, after 10 days, I just gave up on it. So I went to college and then I quit. And I remember Father Cahill talking to me, and he said, your chances of you coming back are pretty slim. And I told him, I said, I can't stay now. I said, I gotta go. And on the way out, he handed me a pamphlet, which was their Rockhurst Night School division. So I started going to night school. And I graduated in '63 with a full BS after attending night school for 6.5 years. So I kind of proved him wrong.
What did you major in?
Business administration with a minor in accounting.
And that started you down a certain career?
Well, when I first came back from the Navy, I applied for Bendix, but they weren't hiring anybody.
And you've said Bendix twice now. What was special about Bendix?
Well, after about a year, then they called me and said they had an opening in their production control department and wanted to know if I was still interested. And boy, I jumped at it.
So Bendix was just a company in town that you happened to apply to a couple of times. There wasn't anything else special about it, or was there anybody that worked there that you knew? Or
well, Chuck, my brother, worked there in the machine shop.
So he was a Bendix employee and was telling you, hey, you ought to look into this place.
Well, and my brother-in-law put in a good word for me.
Your sister's husband,
right,
worked there. Okay. Did anybody else ever work there?
Well, my sister worked there in the nursing department.
Okay.
The only person that didn't work there was my mom.
So, did your dad work there?
Yeah.
And what did he do there?
He was a laboratory assistant, but actually what he did was he was working for a bunch of engineers, and he only had an 8th grade education. So he became their monitor, their dishwasher, you might say. Engineers, they would run their samples and things, but then when it came time to clean up the mess they made with it. That was, and he was tickled pink to have the job.
Okay, so your father worked there, your sister worked there, your brother worked there.
Man, my brother-in-law.
Yeah, and your brother-in-law worked there, and you worked there, so there are 5 of you.
Yeah.
Almost like being back on the farm,
That's
plus
right.
the brother-in-law.
That's right.
Yeah. How long did you spend at Bendix?
37 years.
Was that your one and only job?
In essence, it is.
A primary job through the years. Did you marry?
I got married in 1959.
And you married who?
Rosemary Vitale.
Rosemary Vitale, that sounds Italian.
Strictly Italian.
Strictly Italian. And did you have children?
Yeah. Have 3 children, a girl and 2 boys.
Tell us who they are.
The girl is Susan Gustafson, lives in St. Louis.
That sounds like must have gotten married. That sounds like a different last name.
Yes, she got married, got divorced. And then she got married again and got divorced, so she's now single. She's a retread right now.
She's what?
A retread.
Retread. Okay. She might hear this, so that we're going to say that's a complimentary.
That's very complimentary.
Very complimentary, yes. And she lives in St. Louis.
Yes.
And then you said you had a son?
The middle child is David.
Uh-huh.
And he's 52 years old now. And he's a minister in the Assembly of God church organization.
Okay. He's spreading the good word of the Lord.
Right.
And where does he live?
He also lives in St. Louis.
Okay. Any others?
And then I have the youngest son, Gary, that lives here in the city.
Here in Kansas City?
In Kansas City, in South Overland Park.
And what does he do?
He is in the marketing division for Sprint Corporation.
For Sprint Corporation?
Yes.
Okay. And did any of your children reproduce their own children?
Well, Sue's not married.
Okay. David?
David had 3, had Paul, Nick, and Melissa.
Mm-hmm.
And Gary's got 2 boys, Joe, Danny, and a girl that's a freshman in high school.
So 6 grandchildren.
And now they have, I now have 4 great-grandchildren, 2 boys and 2 girls.
This tree, this Godbout tree, has spread out quite a bit.
Yes, it has.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go into the details of your working life and married life and fatherhood, because I think the people that will hear this were there, present with you. But I do want to go back to the farm. Do you think back on those days warmly? Do you feel fortunate to have spent your youth in a country and farming environment?
Yes, very much so. I probably didn't realize it at the time. But as I get older and you see things that remind you of the farm.
When I walked in here today, on a piece of furniture across the room, I see 3 tractors. Look like they're collectible metal tractors. So you still have an affinity, I think, for all things concerning farms. Are you a farm boy?
Yes, very much so.
Have you become more wistful about farming as you have gotten older?
Yes. It kind of grows on you.
And have you kind of kept up with what's going on in farming? Back then you had Pete and Jenny and eventually this 6-year-old tractor, and, farming's gotten quite a bit different today. Have you followed it or kept up with it at all?
Well, I was very, very fortunate that when I retired, which was in 94, I became acquainted with a farm family in Olathe and Spring Hill. Mm-hmm. And that was the Boehm, that's Boehm, the Boehm Farms.
The Bain Farm. The bane of your existence. Ha ha ha.
That's right.
Okay.
And I retired, and I was going to the Catholic Church out in Olathe at the time, and they had after Mass the Knights of Columbus was having a pancake breakfast. So I thought, well, I'll just stay and have breakfast down the basement of the church. And so I was all by myself, and there was two couples that were sitting at the end of the table, and I was just listening to their conversation, wasn't butting in, just listening to their conversation. And it turned out that they were Ralph and Ina Beam, and they were talking. The men folks were talking what they were going to do that afternoon, and Ralph made the comment that he was going to be cutting soybeans. So the first family got up and left, and so then I thought, well, I got nothing to lose, so I walked over to their end of the table, introduced myself, and told them that I heard you talking about cutting soybeans this afternoon. And I told him that I grew up on a farm, and I was just kind of curious, how your bean crop goes. He said, I'm going to be cutting beans down south on Ridgeview. Come on out and you can ride in the combine with me.
Oh my gosh, that must have been, were you expecting that?
No, I was not expecting that. But I went home and changed my clothes into workable overalls. And he was down cutting soybeans on about 99th and Spring Hill.
Mm-hmm.
So that afternoon, then I rode with him in the combine.
Man, tell me about that. So that was unexpected, and of course you didn't have a combine back when you were farming. Tell me your emotions or what you felt like. Must have been...
Oh, it was fantastic.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think we solved all the problems of the whole damn world that afternoon, because it turned out that when I was in the Navy, he was in the Army in Korea, so we had a lot in common.
So was that that combine ride, was that it?
That was it. So I told him, I said, if he ever needed any help, why give me a call. I gave him my phone number. And I didn't hear from him for about a month, and I just kind of threw him off. But then he called me, and he said, we need somebody to drive a tractor to cultivate this one field. I want to plant some corn in it. And so I told him, I said, I'll be out in about a half an hour. And since when I retired from Bendix, I got a retirement package, and I had all kinds of tax money that I was owing. So I told him, I said, you just give me a good meal for lunch, and I won't charge anything for the driving the tractor. So I worked for him all that fall.
For food? Will farm for food?
Yeah, farm for food. And I worked from 94 to 2009.
1994 to 2009.
Yeah, so that was 15 years. 15 years. I was getting older at that point, and so I figured it was time to hang it up.
Did he ever pay you, or did you always farm for food?
Well, after the first farming for food, well, he said, why don't we work out some payment here? And I said, oh, all right. I said, well, he was also hiring the neighbor boy for about $12 an hour. Really a good mechanical kid. So we agreed that I would charge him $5 an hour. Mm-hmm. He was tickled and I was tickled. So I worked for him for 15 years for $5 an hour.
That was some shrewd negotiation.
Yeah.
You went from a dinner to $40 a day.
That's right.
Yeah, but really this was about the love. You were reliving farm experiences. You were a farm hand.
Again. Well, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Wow, that's quite a story. We'd probably need to start winding this down. I started this broadcast talking about having both legs in 2 centuries, straddling the line between the 20th century, which you spent 60-some years in, and the 21st century. Can you give us a little perspective, all of the technology that has changed? First of all, which of the 2 centuries is your favorite?
Well, since the first century was kind of tied in with the Korean War, which is very questionable as to why we got into it. I don't want to go into that now. But I just prefer to live in the current century rather than the past century.
Let me explore that just a little bit. So in the past century, we didn't have as many comforts at all, and the technology was not as prevalent as it is today. But a lot of people will say, but it was a simpler time, and it was easy to get along. And today, we probably have more comforts due to technology, but it's not so simple anymore.
Well, I'd go along with that. The world is in a turmoil right now.
Globally?
Yes. And
what about our country?
Well, our country's a mess. Not to politicize it, but it seems like that all the news wants to report about the riots and who's shooting who and who's blaming who. It's just a mess.
Do you think that's happening more, or because of technologies we hear about it more, or both?
I think it's both.
Uh-huh.
Very much so, it's both.
And were people generally more unified or more polite or courteous in the old century?
Well, I think they were. They weren't saturated so much with the newscasts.
Yes, so we're being talked to more and more.
Yes.
Right. How have you done with technology as you've gotten older? First of all, let me ask a couple questions. Do you have a computer?
No, I do not have a computer.
Did you have to use computers in your work life at Bendix?
Yes.
Okay.
And I told myself when I retired I didn't want to get involved with a computer.
Okay.
I think that was a mistake because then.
Do you wish you had remained involved with computers?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't even know how to get on the internet.
That was one of my questions. Do you surf the internet? And the answer is
no.
Probably not. Do you have a cell phone?
Yes.
And do you use it as a telephone?
No, I just use it for emergency calls.
Okay. Do you text on your phone? Send
No.
text messages?
No.
Okay. Do you take pictures with your phone?
No.
Do you have a landline phone in your house?
Yes.
Which is your primary number?
My landline number.
Do you watch TV?
I try to watch specific programs. I don't find myself being glued to the TV.
Do you still take a newspaper?
No, as of last month I canceled the Kansas City Star.
So do you kind of feel, and I think you alluded to this, that you are being dwarfed a little bit by technology that's coming on the scene that you're no longer worried about, or, not worried about, but no longer learning about?
I'd say that's a true statement.
Did you have that feeling much in the last century?
No, I don't think so.
Have you thought or pondered on where we're going to go as a people with technology in the next 25 to 50 years?
No, because it scares me when I look back over the last 10 years and the technology breakthroughs that we've experienced. It just kind of, you have no idea what it's going to be like in 25 years.
So you went to the bathroom in an outhouse, and you had coal-burning lamps, and no refrigerator, and one bath a week. And today we have this thing called the internet, and we've been to the moon. We have cell phone capability. That's quite a jump in technology since you've been alive. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely.
And did you have any idea that as a youngster, or even as a young man, that you would see these kinds of changes?
Not in the least.
What do you think about our youth today who have no idea at all how to slaughter a hog or run away from a rooster or be a little bit hot in the summertime or very, very cold in the winter? The youth of today have so many different things that they deal with, different kinds of trouble that I suspect you and I don't really understand. But do you have a general feeling about the youth today and how they're doing and what they're doing?
Well, I think mostly they're going to be more educated than we were. But I think as far as the simpler things of life, enjoyment out of life, they're going to be missing the boat.
Because of the fast pace?
Because of the fast pace and the readily available news, social networks. It's just all going to be fast pace.
Right. All right, I want to ask you one or two other things. There's no way around this. I'm just going to jump into it. I am 63, and I am aware that I have less time in front of me than I have behind me. And you're older than I am.
Half-life category.
And you're older, and so you have even a little less time in front of you than behind you than I do. And so I guess what I'm saying is we both are going to die, but unless I get hit by a car going home today, there's a chance that you're going to leave us before I do. Is that something you think about at this age?
Well, let me put it this way. It's something that I think about, but I try not to dwell on it.
Okay. So you don't have a fear?
No.
What do you have when you think about the shortness of life here on the planet, and that you're on the short end of the stick here?
Well, I'm 84 years old. I'll be 85 in September. I have a wonderful family network, relatives. So I think about it, but I try not to dwell on it.
So it sounds like you're grateful and have gratitude for the life that you've lived to get to this point.
Oh, very much so.
And that's due to, you mentioned your family, your children, very special friends that you may have made late in life, and your memories.
Well, I had some rough times as far as my life was concerned, but when I think back over them, I had a joyous life. And there's a lot of people, even the facility that I live in, the house, there's a lot of people that are extremely worse off than I am. Like there's one gentleman that has a kidney dialysis machine. He goes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for about 6 hours. Well, I don't have to do that. But
no, if you don't mind my saying, I think you're in really fine shape.
Well, I have really developed a gratitude for but I've noticed that as I'm getting older, it's harder to do things that I used to do, and I try to accept the fact that it takes me more time to get up off of a chair than it used to.
Is there something that you could say you were most proudest of? And I know I'm hitting you with that question suddenly. That often takes some thought, but
I think that what I'm the most proud of is, go in chronological order here, is Susan, David, and Gary. That's the nucleus. They have a lot of capabilities that their mom has. And I know it didn't work out as far as their mother's concerned, but we're on speaking terms. We're on good terms now. Mm-hmm. She has a right to her life, and I have a right to my life. Mm-hmm. So we're just kind of making a gel. She's a very talented individual and would have made a heck of a real estate salesman, I think. So,
that's that very Italian trait.
Yes.
Person that you mentioned, yeah. Sounds like that's a very grown-up perspective, especially important for the fact that we are on this planet only a certain amount of time.
Right.
So all is peaceful in your world.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really important. That is something to be proud of. Is there anything that, well, here's a very, very, very funny question. Let's write an epitaph that you would have on your gravestone for those who are ambling through the cemeteries. I, for one, like to walk through cemeteries, and if I walked through, or if somebody walked through the cemetery and happened to stumble upon your stone and it said, "Here lies Robert Godbout," well, first of all, they would say, "How do you pronounce that?" But "Here lies Robert Godbout," and then what line would you like to have underneath that, etched in granite, that says something about you to these people that you have never met?
Well,
and I can help you form the phrase, but what are your thoughts? I'm really more interested in your thoughts.
I think that to have a feeling of thanksgiving for all the people that touched my life when I went through this life.
And that, again, that is a feeling of gratitude.
Very much so.
So I don't want to use the word luck because we make our own luck, but I'm going to say it sounds like you were a lucky guy.
Oh, I'm very lucky. There were some ups and downs, but I'm so extremely thankful for the blessings that have occurred in my life.
Well, that's good. How about if we just say, "I was one hell of a lucky guy"? I think that would fit on the stone, right?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
That sums it up.
Should we order that up?
That's true. Let's order it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get ready to say goodbye. One last, anything you want to say to your listeners, and I think you know who they may be.
I'm thankful for everything that have occurred in my life, and I try to be appreciative of this Thanksgiving feeling.
Okay. Good.
Okay.
Well, why don't we say goodbye, and you look at me and I'll look at you, and let's wave and say goodbye.
Goodbye.
I really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome.
All right.
I enjoyed having breakfast with you.
Let's do it again.
Enjoyed the time that we spent today.
I did too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob Godbout.
Around Seneca, we're known as Godbouts. Down here in the city, thanks to my dad, it's Godbout.
So that's the farm side of you and the city. You were a
right.
Country mouse and a city mouse.
Right.
Good. All right. We have to say goodbye for real. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thanks for your time, Mr. Jerry.
You're welcome.